Welcome back. I'm Vince Perryman and you're watching Legalese. Joining us on our show today is attorney Bruce Ralston of Memphis bankruptcylawyer.com. We're discussing tax debts in bankruptcy. Bruce, we've given a good outline in our first segment as to how the bankruptcy works and that there's three different debt pots and that taxes can fall into any of those. So how do we start the analysis of what sort of tax debt is this?
There are a number of different starting points, but I think the really basic starting point is well, here's the outline for dealing with taxes in bankruptcy. In order to discharge a tax debt, and remember we're talking about secured, unsecured, and priority, and general unsecured debts can be discharged. In Chapter 7 they are discharged, which basically means eliminated. And in Chapter 13, they are treated, general unsecured debts are treated the same as credit cards and medical bills, which might be paid pennies on the dollar, and that's all. So one of our goals is to make this an unsecured, general unsecured debt. And the starting point is, it has to be a personal income tax debt. So only individuals can discharge debts, or only individuals can receive discharges at all, and that certainly applies to taxes as well. So is it a personal income tax? If it's a trust fund tax, if it's a 941, if it's any kind of payroll tax or anything other than a personal income tax, this does not apply. That's the end of the conversation. No point in going any farther. The next question is, we do 3 years, 2 years, 240 days. And I'm going to go through this quickly and then kind of expand on each section a little bit. The tax return must have first been due to be filed at least 3 years prior to the filing of the bankruptcy. The tax return must have actually been filed at least 2 years prior to the filing of the bankruptcy, and then there must not have been any assessment by the IRS, any new assessment by the IRS within the last 240 days. So going back to the beginning, 3 years from the due date, and the first two rules here to the uninitiated kind of sound the same, but they're really not at all. It's literally the due date. So most years that's going to be April 15th of the year following the tax year. And let's just take an example. If it was, if the tax year we're talking about is 2005, then and I haven't looked back in my calendar, but let's just assume that the tax was due to be filed on April 15th of that year. Then that's what we do. Now, if April 15th fell on a weekend or a holiday, then you got to give it that extra day. And sometimes you get into situations where there's even 3 or 4 extra days. You know, Massachusetts has Patriots Day, and then last year they had the Patriots Day bombing at the Boston Marathon, and they gave people in Massachusetts an extra 90 days to file their tax return. So if you have somebody who moved here from Massachusetts at some certain magic time, then you really have to think about this stuff. So one of the basic rules is wait as long as you can wait, even if you know you're past the 3 years. If you requested an extension for that year, and again, nobody's going to remember this. The only way you're going to know is by looking at that account transcript. So, but if you did actually request an extension, then it's October 15th. You know, up until a few years ago, there was this intermediate point of August 15th, but that's been more than 3 years ago, so that's no longer a factor in this conversation. So if they requested an extension, now the due date is October 15th. So in that example of the 2005 tax year, where the initial due date would have been April 15th, 2006. Now, if you're after April 16th of 2009, now you're beyond 3 years. Okay, so due date, very specifically due date. Second test is the tax return must have actually been filed at least 2 years prior to the filing of the case, and that's pretty simple. There is no floating calendar date. It's just quite literally, if I'm filing this bankruptcy petition today, was that tax return filed at least 2 years and a day ago? And this has to actually be filed by the taxpayer. This is the tax the IRS does SFRs. If you don't file your own tax returns, eventually the service is going to file a return for you. That does not count as the filing of a return. There is, and also, for instance, in Mississippi has a state tax return, and their state tax definition specifically defines a return as something that has been filed by the due date. So if you're late on your Mississippi state tax return, then you might not ever be able to discharge that debt. It might always at least be considered either priority or non-dischargeable, which we won't get into those details right now. The next question is assessment. Assessment doesn't become an issue very often. Usually once you file the return, the IRS assesses within a few weeks or at least a couple of months, and that's the end of that. And if you pass the first two rules, then then that 240 days expired a long time ago. But there could be a new audit. What does happen sometimes is somebody cashed out a retirement account, or some other 1099 was somehow omitted from their tax return. So they filed their tax return, and it was assessed according to that return that was filed back then. But then 2 years later, the IRS, following up on all of their systems, says, oh, there's a 1099 that you didn't count. We're going to reassess this, and they send you the letter saying you now owe us this much more money for that tax year. That's a new assessment. So if you were to file a bankruptcy less than 240 days after that new assessment, the original assessment still applies. So that would be general unsecured if the other tests are passed. But the new assessment would not be dischargeable. Sometimes that matters, sometimes it doesn't. How much is it? What other things are going on in this person's life right now? Do they have pressure to go ahead and file? Can they wait a little while longer? Yeah, I have really upset some clients in the past by making them wait. The people who have multiple years of tax returns that are due, and they've just gotten around to filing them, and now you got to wait for 1 year after another to fall off the table. We're ready. We've made the decision. I'm ready to jump. Yeah. But no, you really need to wait another year. Oh please, go ahead and file for me. And they don't. They understand, but they've made that decision. They want to move on.
Well, we're getting the signal to wrap up this section. So when we return from our break, we'll talk more with Bruce Ralston about tax debts and bankruptcy. Please stay with us.